Well, I'm hoping the time has come.
I have insight. I believe the time has returned.
Good, 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 good.
Good.
Good morning.
Hello. Well, let's get started and we'll introduce ourselves since we're a small group for now. My name is Allison Stone. I'm with Catholic Charities and I'm just serving as facilitator of the workshop to keep us on time to introduce the world famous Mr. Ray Kelly and to get the conversation started. So as many of you may already know, Ray was born and raised in West Baltimore, is currently the director of the Citizens Policing Project, which is working on all things related to making our Baltimore Police Department more fair and just. And Ray does a lot of social justice advocacy, a lot of community advocacy in the city, especially in Sandtown and neighborhoods in West Baltimore. He was also formerly the CEO of the No Boundaries Coalition. So that was in 2015 and prior when everything happened with Freddie Gray. So it's a lot of history and wisdom and knowledge from life experience and leadership in our fair city. So Ray, is it okay if we just go around and say names and parish?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. I'll jump over to Jerry.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jerry Bittner. I'm from St. Francis of Assisi Parish. And Ray spoke at the Northeast Catholic Community Zoomy thing about 2 weeks ago, which was really excellent. So I just thought this would be a great follow-up.
Pam.
Excuse me, my name is Pam Isabel, and I'm with St. Alphonsus Rodriguez in, I guess it straddles Howard and Baltimore counties.
Hi, good morning. My name is Megan Gordon, and I'm a member of St. Cecilia's Church.
Oh, cool.
Welcome. Betsy.
Hey, I'm Betsy Cunningham. I live on Charles Street in North Baltimore, and I'm coming to you today from Chicago, where I'm hiding out from COVID in my condominium.
Welcome. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here to talk about this very important topic. And thanks for being the brave that the brave group that stuck with the convocation in its 42nd year on Zoom. We'll hand it over to Ray.
Thank you, Allison. And good morning, everyone. And before I kind of introduce myself and what I do, I just like to say that I love it when it's this tight little group like this. So that way everybody gets to speak, and we know if you're coming to policing, you got questions. This is a hectic year of policing. So I think this is an opportunity to find out how we can all contribute to, we like to say, an equitable change in policing. And we'll get into that however way you want to get into it. But like Allison said, I've been not specific to policing, but a public safety advocate in West Baltimore for almost 20 years now. Hey, Tony.
Hi, Ray.
And I've had a specific focus on police and community relations for about 12 years. For me, it didn't actually start with reform, but more visibility in community, consistency with who patrols communities, and not really addressing public safety from a policing aspect, but more a collaborative, unified aspect. So that's how I initially got into the police reform focus. In like 2012, we started focusing on accountability. So we felt like Baltimore City, the structure, it being the police department is a state agency. There were so many protections and laws that perpetuated this. So we started focusing on civilian oversight and police accountability in 2012. And we actually worked with the police department on these issues, but we were that group that held them accountable, not really for their policies, but more what they said to the community. So we started this whole aspect of bringing people into the conversations that are from these impacted communities. And preemptive of 2015, there was multiple times where the city was warned and people kind of said, this is where we are and this is what's happening. So all of that decade of work kind of avalanched in 2015. And it was an awakening, I'll say, for the city. And under the Obama administration, there was a task force on 21st century policing that kind of preceded the Freddie Gray incident by months. So I think that report was issued on April 27th, we had the Freddie Gray incident, and immediately we had a Department of Justice investigation happening in Baltimore. So they investigated for years. They did an investigation. We created a commission and we did a parallel investigation. And it became the first time that the DOJ recognized a parallel investigation in their investigative report. So that helped propel the work we were doing. And eventually we established what we called a people's decree. And we had 16 recommendations of reforms for the Baltimore Police Department. And when the courts and the DOJ established their consent decree, 12 of our recommendations from the People's Decree were actually in the consent decree. So we are now in the third year of that consent decree. And if that's fancy language for anybody, the consent decree is simply a settlement. So you can look at it like a court case where someone sues someone else in civil court. So the consent decree is the Department of Justice sued Baltimore City's police department. And when they went to court, Baltimore City agreed to settle the case. And the consent decree is the mandates that they must fulfill in order to be in compliance with the settlement. I currently,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Tony.
No, I just wanted to ask how the Archdiocese is involved in this effort.
They're not.
Okay.
But we can get to that. We can talk about the work group and all, but no, there isn't a direct correlation with the Archdiocese and policing. There's a big effort to kind of push the Archdiocese to kind of move the needle on racism and oppressive practices as well. The Archbishop and Bishop Madden have honestly been, I'll say, friends of me. So they have kind of stepped out of the box to speak on these issues a few times. I actually had the Archbishop Lori did the convocation at a protest that I had at the federal courthouse. following the George Floyd death. That's kind of quiet. People don't really know that they have, even though this is not a archdiocesan-wide movement at this point, our leadership as individuals have definitely taken a stance and stepped outside of what we normally expect from an archbishop or a bishop or even priests, where I think because of the national push to finally incorporate equity in policing, more people in those authoritative and ideological positions feel like it's time to express their own humanity, and hopefully we'll push this work. And me and Allison actually served on the restorative and social justice work group for the Archdiocese racism work group. And I will say, we had a pretty strong letter and a pretty strong recommendations. And because I'm an advocate, I wanted to make sure it didn't get diluted and watered down. So when I sent it in, I sent it straight to the Archbishop, and he sent the confirmation that he received it. And we'll see. It's been a couple of 100 years, so it's like a snail in the desert, I guess, Tony. We can go into that, but I kind of want to hear from you guys where you are. We all know that in Maryland, session is happening right now. My priorities have been for years, local control of Baltimore Police Department. So Baltimore Police has been a state agency pre-emancipation. People don't know that. We've been a state agency since 1860. And we like to say in the advocacy world that it's ironic that Baltimore lost his police department because white people rioted, and now they use the police department to ensure that Black people don't riot. And that's kind of, when we speak equity, we talk about systemic oppression. So in conceptual terms, Baltimore City is about 63% Black people. The police department is 21% Black. Maryland controls Baltimore City's police department, where Maryland, the statewide population is about 30% Black. And the Maryland General Assembly makes the decisions for the police department. So essentially, our police department's representation in no way reflects the population that it serves. And that's why we fight for local control. Another thing we consistently fight for is the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. A lot of people don't know that police have their own Bill of Rights. It's outside of the realm of the Constitution, and that Bill of Rights, there's a specific Bill of Rights for law enforcement officers that essentially gives them protections under their auspice as agents of the government. And then that goes on to, I'm sure you've heard of qualified immunity and all those types of things. And that's where we stand right now. So we're getting traction this year in the General Assembly. I feel like it's because it's under the cloak of the pandemic and nobody can actually see what's going on unless you're a legislative advocate and you're reading all those policies. You don't really know what's happening, but both of those bills have passed in either the House or the Senate this year. So it's looking real good for local control. This is the first, I think I went to Annapolis 7 times to fight for local control. this is the first time we've ever had the mayor and the city council on board for local control. So that's a promising aspect. The law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights repeal has already passed in the House and the Senate, and there's a fight going on as we speak to ensure that it passes the way that it's written in the House. There's once again a push to kind of water it down by making it illegal for different jurisdictions to have their own civilian oversight for state charges. So it's kind of a quirky way of keeping everything internal, no matter whom the police department is. So now we're fighting those repeals. And Allison, I just saw a question in the chat, but you know, that's a little print for me.
Yeah, Betsy was asking, she heard that the Republicans in the Senate on the federal level might oppose the appointment of Gupta, or I don't know if it's Gupta or Gupta, to Assistant Attorney General, because she has made comments that they are interpreting to mean that she might support defunding the police. So she said, is there a way we can respond to this as Christians working for equity in policing?
So one, Vanita Gupta was my pick for Attorney General. I have worked with her. I trust her. There is always going to be opposition to police reform from the Republican Party. They are, we'll say, crime and justice party, in their words, not ours, because justice has a shaky definition. But for us in Baltimore, we see the regression when President Trump became president. The DOJ's focused on a different aspect and not reforming and equity in policing. And it kind of made the whole process of building relationships and actually having constitutional policing a near impossibility, despite the Department of Justice outlining all of these wrongs that the Baltimore police had done and the consent decree. Still, the Republican Party kind of helps to elevate that narrative that the police are a different or a higher breed. They serve this special purpose and no one can understand what their job is. And I think that's why we have things like qualified immunity and why we consistently have protests and why we are trying to train officers on implicit bias and things of that nature, because we have to face the fact that policing as we know it is a tool created when the slaves were freed. So to conceptualize, in the dictionary, police is a verb that means to keep clean. So pre-emancipation, to police the grounds meant to keep it clean, fill the potholes, fix the fences. And there were no officers of the law. They had overseers of the land. Law enforcement was left to the sheriff and whom he deputized. So you had a sheriff, you had deputies, and there was no policing in the concept. Post-emancipation, then there became this concern about retaliation for years of mistreatment and protecting property and goods of these former slave owners. So you had these sheriffs who were still in a supremic mindset deputize the people that took care of the land, the people that oversaw the slaves, to control this newly freed population. So then from the overseers and the people that policed, you actually created this concept of a police officer. And it wasn't a law enforcement officer anymore, because now that job wasn't just about enforcing the law, and they kind of incorporate we're going to protect and serve, but really that concept was to protect the property of the people that formerly owned these slaves. So for me, I'm in agreement that the concept of policing has to change. I think it's a decade away from the prospect of defunding the police, just because of the public safety and the environments that we've created because of the past practices, as well as criminal justice and things of that nature that perpetuate the land that we live in today. And that's always the rebuttal from the police is, look how much crime is out there. Look how much violence. We have to do it the way we do it. And really, to defund the police, to me, was the perfect conversation starter, so we can get into these things we've talked about forever. The mental health piece. I know since I've been in police reform, that's been the conversation. Police should not answer calls with mental health crises or things of that nature. And that can't happen with the signing of a bill, because really that's a cultural change on both ends. We in community have to recognize and learn that we shouldn't call the police every time there's a situation we can't control, because the key word with the police department is law enforcement. So they're not really coming to talk to anyone. They're not coming to really de-escalate a situation. They're coming to gain control by enforcement. So they're not trained. If someone is having a mental break and has a knife, they use what they're trained to do, which is shoot, protect, whatever the case may be. And until we train us to use a different mechanism, no matter how much training we get the police, we're going to keep calling them for the wrong stuff. And this type of thing is going to still keep happening. So, like I said, that whole defund is creating the right conversation that we've been needing for decades to start moving this pendulum forward. So now the conversation has moved from defund the police to divest and invest. So it's like divest those funds from tactical and enforcement type entities into more citywide agencies, social services, and cooperative plans that spread that money throughout the agencies. And incidentally, that is defunding the police, because now you're not paying for this relative service for the police to do. So really, we pay the police. If they come to your house and there's a mental health crisis and it takes 3 or 4 hours to actually get to a point and it completely gets de-escalated, someone from Mental Health Alliance comes out and helps, and the person goes for treatment in a center, we've still paid the police to handle that situation. So really, now we've found out that this is the proper way to go. We've called those people, but we called the police first. They did all of this associative legwork, and then we come in and we pay the mental health people. So we got to get those people in the front. We've got to learn preventative. We can't wait till there's a blow up. We know if we have loved ones, and this is Baltimore City, we have, all of us almost have loved ones that have had a mental issue or whatever the case may be, where we have to promote health and making sure that they're taking their medications and things of that nature, so we don't get in a situation that we can't control and have to call the police. That was long. I hope that helped, Betsy.
We might want to take a minute and see if anybody else has questions they want to ask before Ray continues.
I'm gonna check the chat.
Yeah, Betsy did ask if you have one good sentence to share with senators or representatives when she calls about divesting and investing. Good elevator speech.
One good sentence about, I think we just have to let them know that we recognize that police officers are not social workers. So let's invest some of that money from policing into social work, when so many of the calls that police get are not law enforcement issues.
Mhm.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to also add that we need to separate out this bad policing. We need to separate out these people.
I agree. And I think because of police unions and the stature that our governments have put on policing, we were allowed for half a century to be fed that bad apples type BS. So there's only a couple of bad apples. And in Baltimore, you see over the past 5 years with Freddie Gray and the Gun Trace Task Force, and I'll be honest, just the citywide political corruption, that we got a bad tree. We don't just have a bad borough. We need a new grove. We need to uproot, plant soil, and like you said, we have to root out. And I'll give Commissioner Harrison credit. It's quiet, but he's removed a lot of people that we in the advocacy world saw as leaders and perpetuators of what's been happening in Baltimore for years. I'm not sure if you were even part of that, Tony, way back in the day when we were with Build, and 2 of the officers that were indicted in the Gun Trace Task Force, people in the community, people in that meeting named them by name. So this is essentially 4 years before the GTTF, and the community knew who were the bad officers, and even back then they were naming lieutenants. And then we see 4 years later, even while we're having the DOJ investigate the police department, they're still doing it. So that's, to your point, we need a new Grove, a new Farmer, new Johnny Appleseed to come and make sure it's from scratch. And I think that's what the consent decree kind of mandates. There's always the issue of weeding out, because the argument is always, oh, you're making people lose their jobs and blah, blah, blah. And this is how we were trained. But somehow what you said has to happen if this consent decree is going to work. I will say that the Baltimore Police Department now has something they adopted from New Orleans called the EPIC program. And for me, I think that's the most important first step. So the EPIC program stands for Ethical Policing is Courageous. And it's an internal accountability measure. I've always said that police will never be accountable to whom they consider suspects when the police department is divided. They're not even accountable to each other. So this EPIC program essentially is a training, and they actually have to sign the pledge at the end of it, and it makes them hold each other accountable. So under the EPIC program, just for an example, George Floyd wouldn't have happened if it was being implemented correctly. And if the same result had happened, then all of those officers that were there standing around would have been fired because they've signed a pledge to hold each other to these established ethical standards of operation. And that's kind of a lot of why this commissioner gets recognized for what he did in New Orleans. So it wasn't really about the actual legislative reforms. He just was that guy. He was intolerant of certain things and he would fire. I mean, there was a lot of racism in the New Orleans Police Department, and he was intolerant of it. And a lot of people got fired for things that you just think are every day. Using the N-word would have gotten you fired immediately in New Orleans, where here it's just buddy-buddy conversation and it's accepted and tolerated, and he didn't tolerate it. And eventually the officers that was left, to Tony's point, weren't the bad apples anymore, because not only did he start weeding them out, but as the other officers start seeing their comrades getting weeded out, then they start snitching. Okay, it's this guy, it's this guy, it's this guy. And that's the paradigm that we're trying to create here. And that essentially is what tears down the blue wall. And we've been saying it for years: consequences. If you insert a fear of consequences, people will think twice about how they act. And that should go for police officers as well.
Ray, how much is the FOP like an impediment to reform? I mean, are they cooperating with the consent decree to the degree that you would hope? Or
Jerry, I love you, but you know, every fight ends with the FOP in this. So really, for me, the FOP fights for their contracts. So these privileges we talk about repealing in the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights are the privileges that the FOP fought for to get the Bill of Rights. And the same with local control. We actually had the president of the local control of the FOP tell the state legislator that Baltimore City has to grow up before they can have control of their police department. We actually have the Black Police Union, the Vanguard, just sent out a letter speaking on the racism in the Baltimore Police Department, while at the same time outlining their disagreement to all of the legislative reforms that we are advocating for. So this long letter is about how racist the Baltimore Police Department structure is, but they offer no legislative policy remedies or anything to address that. But they do speak against repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, as well as giving local control back to the city. And it's because of their contracts, where we know that if we get local control, by default, they have to renegotiate their collective bargaining agreement. So the Baltimore Police Department will definitely have to get a new contract. And we know that if the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights is repealed, then all of those protections they receive as the boys in blue would then have to be relegated to the same Bill of Rights that all of us have to adhere to. Did that help, Jerry? No,
Yeah,
the FOP never helps.
yeah. The other thing is, and we talked about this a little bit the last time, it's like, it seems like when you talked about like how it was interesting how you talked about the evolution of like the sheriff, and then it became the police, and police was not meant to, was post, Reconstruction, et cetera. And then like, but it seems also that the police have also evolved, like a more militaristic over in different cities as well as Baltimore, and in also utilizing a lot of like military type tactics as well as, their physical structure almost.
And that's because they went to war. So we had
Yeah, exactly.
our country declared war on drugs. And that was the key to militarizing the police department nationally. Now, let's keep in mind that drugs don't shoot back, and drugs don't go to jail. So the war on police, the war on drugs became a war on drug dealers. And that was the local aspect of it. I don't say that the entirety of the war on drugs was to persecute Black people, because the war on drugs went all around the country. We all know how filthy it got, and all kinds of negotiations with Contras and things of that nature, where that war on drugs in the mid-'80s kind of created this modernized concept of policing, militarized, cleaning up the streets. We're gonna lock everyone up. This is what we do, and that's tenfold in the Black community, because the war takes you to where the battle is. So if the drugs are in the inner city, then that's where they went to combat them. And they didn't care about collateral damage and things of that nature. So the people in our communities were at ground zero, just to have an analogy, in any war. But we didn't have the United Nations come in and help. We didn't have the Red Cross come in and give us triage. We just had to live on this red line battlefield. And I think that's what we're trying to undo now, since this whole 21st policing and things of that nature, to undo some of the crimes of the past and identify a different way. Makes sense? Hey, Brian.
Hey, Ray. I just wanted to kind of hop in here and not so much disagree with you, but talk a little bit about emphasis in that you really have to say that the war on drugs has been a thoroughly racist undertaking from the beginning through to the present day. I mean, surveys and so forth show that white people and Black people use drugs at about the same rate, sell drugs at about the same rate. But a Black person is something like, I don't have all the figures in front of me. I would recommend watching 13th, which is Ava DuVernay's great movie. But in any event, a Black person is like 6 times as likely to be arrested, 3 times as likely to be persecuted. And if they're sentenced, if they go to jail, or excuse me, not persecuted, prosecuted, if that gets them to, they're like twice as likely to be convicted but also if they go to jail behind one of these things, they're like, they get like, the sentence is something like 7 times as long on the average. And with like half the people, I think, in prison for crimes like possession or small lot distribution, it's just, I mean, there's no sense talking about this being a anything but a racist pursuit. And I just, want to keep that sort of in the front.
Right. And we all know that in this country, every inch of the war on drugs, from the prosecution to the actual tactical enforcement, that all happens in our community. So those numbers are not surprising. We know it's been racially motivated since the Nixon years. That's without a question. We know that we are the targeted population in this country because this country is built on that type of supremic ideals, and we have always been the expendable people. We can't we can't only focus that racism on the war of drugs, which is an important aspect. As you know, I'm from that returning citizen place. I've been a victim of everything I advocate for, but we also know that Blackness was criminalized long before we even had a term called racism. So you think of America, and it was against the law to teach a Black person how to read. So white people didn't teach us to read, so they can go, essentially those types of laws made it illegal for a Black person to even act like a free person. You couldn't go, you couldn't do this. All of those things were illegal and written into the policies of how laws were enforced on Black people. And that was before Prohibition, where that same race, you can put it under any cloak. And we know that the root issue of it is racism.
Yeah,
So
I just wanted to add into that this branch is so deep and so wide, not only in the educational system, but also in the medical system. Because I don't know, as a member of the medical system, I can tell you that it is so discouraging when I see people go into the emergency room for a backache or a headache and come out with a prescription for OxyContin. I mean, it's just too deep. It's just so deep, this whole way, this conspiracy to hold people down and to get them hooked on drugs.
So I want to address something to you, Tony, because I heard this recently that doctors to Black women are like police to Black men. Is that a true statement?
Doctors to Black women are like police to Black men.
Where women actually fear going to the doctor or an encounter with the doctor because of past practices, distrust, negligent treatment, whatever the case may be.
Well, having worked in all kinds of systems, particularly with our African-American brothers and sisters, I don't know exactly how that piece goes. I just know that the need for advocacy and voice is real clear. And we need to make sure that the level of healthcare that is presented to people of color is equal to the level of healthcare that's presented to people that are not of color. I mean, you'd be surprised at the disparities. It just, so as for that statement in and of itself, it probably has a lot of validity, but I'm just not sure.
I think I want to pose the question to everyone is, as we talk about changing policing and defunding, abolishing, however we want to approach it, who has thought about who do we contact when there isn't compliance? who do we contact when the police aren't doing what the police are supposed to do? And that's the issue right there, is that there isn't an equalizer in this mix. So, I mean, the DOJ should be the equalizer, but look what happens when we get a Trump in office. That reversion, those 10 steps back. And I think that's something that this national government has to look at. So you have all the states talking diversity, equity, inclusion. It's a buzzword, it's the new thing, but where are you hearing that at a constitutional level? Where is that specific oversight that focuses on DEI issues at that federal level? And that's because this is what this country is built on. And we know systemically this country doesn't want to change. And to kick the can down the road and put that onus on the states is just ensuring that they never change the actual Constitution. And it'll always go to a Supreme Court, and those judgments will be made by the same ideals that created this country 400 years ago. I didn't mean to put everybody in a hush with that, but that's something we don't really think about when we fight for reform, is none of it changes the Constitution. And still the country allows it to go on, and they're now allowed to say, well, that was Maryland, or that was in Texas, and we need to focus, Texas needs to focus on where, if there was a federal law and an actual oversight entity to enforce equity, then this whole situation would be different.
And Ray, Betsy asked, she was talking about this idea of who do you call? She said, I like your idea that we need to not call the police. Do you think the church should be prepared to be an alternative first call for help?
Well, I think we should establish more crisis centers within our church. That's what we're there for. One thing, and there was a study, I can't remember it, but it was in Baltimore, where 80% of the calls for resources originate at a church. And that just means, and people, I go to St. Peter's, so it happens 1,000 times a day where people are calling, knocking on the door. They need help with their gas and electric bill. They're going to get evicted. They need food. The kids need shoes, whatever the case may be. Most of our communities, when they lose hope, turn to the church. So I think the church would be the perfect place to liaise that process. I don't think church members should be going on 911 calls. No, I mean, really, that latest incident, I was called. And, my girlfriend is a social worker. There's no way that I would ever want her as a social worker to answer that call. But that also identified, like I said, we have to make sure that we're being proactive and addressing issues that we know are preemptive. I mean, that family actually said he gets like this all the time. What? So that means this has happened this many times before it's finally escalated to the point where you have him with a gun in the basement with police officers. What do you think is going to happen? And that was another case where the resident actually said, well, we didn't want y'all to kill him. You called the police. They got guns. What did you want them to do? And that kind of creates that reality that this is cultural change on both sides. And we should be the ones to protect our families. So if we're afraid of what happened with the police department, we got to protect our families for that. And I think the churches would be great. I think there's the, what is it called? The Mental Health Alliance would be another great conduit to kind of filter those. Me personally, I think the easiest way would be create a 511 or something for mental health issues, and whomever answers those calls can direct you immediately to that right resource provider, because we know the resources are out here. There are people that are doing this work in community, but the average resident doesn't know that you can call this group, which is 5 minutes away, instead of calling 911. And that's that whole changing of the culture of policing that we all have to undergo. And I've said it all the time. We know that the police department and perception of our community is a aggressive and racist structure. And for years, we've been trying to do whatever we can to handle these things ourselves. So that's why the concept of policing has to be adopted by the community, and then let those officers do law enforcement. We can keep our own street clean. People are not dirt, they're not trash. Like you said, we're here as churches, we're here as community-based organizations and resource providers, where certain things we are willing to do if given the opportunity. But like I said, that's where that divest, invest, defund paradigm can actually be a reality if we kind of, as people, address that policing issue ourselves. We just do it. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, so what I'm hearing you say is that where the church should be is not at the point where this guy has a gun in the basement and is called, but rather should have been people should have been reaching out months, years before that, and churches should have been responding months, years before that, and trying to prevent ever reaching a situation where there's a guy with a gun in the basement.
Right. Well, that's not just church, community as a whole, where the church stands as that already accessible conduit for all resources. There's not a church I've been in, and I've been in a lot of damn churches, where that secretary doesn't have a list taped to her desk. I've been in the old churches where it's slid under the glass, where they have a list of who to call for every situation that is out of the church's purview, where most people in their brains, when they're coming to church, they're thinking, I need help, it's going to be financial, where really every time church secretaries are trained where, well, you should call this number, ask for this person, and they have that list of ready resources where we can preemptively address some of these issues. Then you talk about the disparities that Tony talked about, where we have to then incorporate groups that address those types of healthcare disparity issues and things of that nature. So I think the only feasible concept to institute right now would be a separate source of emergency services, not 911, where I think, and I know everybody on this call has heard me say this 100 times, that all of these efforts have to be led by people of faith, because if you don't believe it can actually happen, then you can't lead that charge. If it's just a job or something that you're going to try to do, then something like this you can't be in the front of. It takes that faith to actually believe that change is possible and we can make it happen. So to your question, Brian, yes, I feel like the church, if this mechanism is created, will by default become the go-to process because of the stature of the church in Baltimore City.
We have about 15 minutes left before there's a break before lunch
Well-
and the social ministry fair.
Come on, volunteer some people, Allison. We haven't heard from a couple of people. I'm loving that we having conversation. I haven't heard from Pam or Megan.
No pressure, Pam or Megan.
I'm going to ask a question, Ray. Have you seen any groups, any small blocks or neighborhoods or churches that have tried to develop the kind of community that would be needed to facilitate this action? Because people seem to be so alone these days,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so they don't have a network of support. And so 911 keeps their individuality, keeps them separate, which is something that people seem to desire. And, but I think that's one of the things that's holding us back.
So in full capacity, no. I try to kind of do that piece with St. Peter Claver and St. Pius. I think the best mechanism I've seen, and I don't know if Megan's familiar with Immaculate, but Immaculate Conception, they used to have a mechanism that addressed addiction. And if you went through that, it was called the DePaul House. And they kind of had those resource mechanisms in place, as well as an office that was specific to addressing those referral issues. So I think Immaculate Conception had a real good prototype. The work, I think every church, especially in the inner city, has a component to preemptively address those communal needs. I think because of capacity and resources, they can only do so much. But I think if it was more of an archdiocesan initiative, so to speak, then they can make it work. There was a collaborative at the Bon Secours where they had between healthcare for the homeless and the Rick's Drug Treatment Center and the family clinic that they created, where that faith community was able to create a sustainable model that they still use. And still, there's other pieces that are still missing. But I think we have a lot of pieces to build on, but I think that whole separation of church and state has kind of contributed to how much we involve our parishes in these types of issues as well. And let's face it, in the inner city, you kind of address the issues that are the priority of your immediate community. And then in the churches on the outskirts and in the counties or the more affluent churches, you kind of donate to whatever it is that ignites your church's conscience or passions. And there isn't a concerted church-wide, diocesan-wide effort to coordinate this type of effort.
That's kind of, I mean, partly what Catholic Charities was trying to do at St. Edward's, I think, in the past few years, where St. Edward's, you know, had a school, so they had space, a school that was empty. And we were able to partner in a few different ways with the parish so that it wasn't I mean, we're trying to learn better as an agency, like not to just come in and be like, here we are, aren't we great? But what does the community need? How can we help you? So to partner with the volunteers at the parish who already had a food pantry, but like to connect them with some Maryland state funding for that. And we have Head Start there at St. Edward's. And then after, Freddie Gray, the pastor, said, we need people to be able to access jobs, and not all the way over there on the Fallsway where you have your employment center, but like right here. So we started an employment center there at St. Edward's that has kind of transitioned during this COVID time to a lot more online. But there's ways that Catholic Charities wants to continue to partner in that kind of effort, as opposed to like, oh, we need to build another building, or we need to have these centralized services at one spot. Like, we want to become more, no, we're out there. I mean, which St. Vincent de Paul does too with its parish conferences. Like, how can we be more parish based and less Catholic Charities with walls, with brick and mortar?
And I agree. I think the concept that Catholic Charities uses is perfect. We have Safe Streets at St. Peter's, where these churches have been here for almost 100 years. They're recognized as the place to go when all hope is lost and you need help. And in my brain, I'm saying that only God can help me now. So I'm going to go to the church, where we need to incorporate the resources into the places that the people go to for resources. So I think that's the key. Until there's like I said, an archdiocesan effort to coordinate it, it's going to take what Catholic Charities is doing, and DePaul House and CPP and all of those groups to keep being where people come. And I think that's probably something you've noticed at Catholic Charities, and we notice at the churches, is no matter what the situation, those people are going to come and ask how they access it to the church. And most of the time, we can't provide that specific service, but you have a group like a CPP and a Catholic Charities, or whatever the case may be, that knows exactly where to go and who to contact. And then you become a referral source at the root of where people come to for referrals.
Allison, I wanted to ask you something at kind of this juncture, but Catholic Charities is doing work in all these areas, in all these neighborhoods, and that's a good thing. But I was just wondering, how do you deal with liaisoning or interacting with non-church groups? Because some of them, like I'm thinking of people like Tubman House, 300 Gangsters. There's a number of food distribution charities or operations that are, mutual aid type operations. Does Catholic Charities reach out to them at all? What do you do when someone who is not a church affiliate calls you and says, hey, we're interested in this? Is that a thing that y'all have explored at all?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, some of that has been definitely changed in the past 5 years, based on our community engagement efforts, that instead of, we used to have kind of the model of like community outreach, like go out and tell people what we do, and then the people will come to us, and trying to shift that to, we now have a person who works in community engagement to try to meet not just church folks, but meet nonprofits and other community leaders to say, hey, what are you doing? What do you need? What could we help with, perhaps? What resources might we have that we could bring to bear, to Ray's point? And right now we've had to do that by kind of focusing on a couple of neighborhoods. So it's not wide scale yet, but we started with Sandtown and Cherry Hill, or kind of broadly West Baltimore, but because we had programs there, we own the Cherry Hill Town Center. Little known fact. We owned it for 20 plus years, but and we have Head Start in Cherry Hill, and we have, Head Start in West Baltimore, and some mental health programs. So just trying to look at like, where are the churches? Where are we? Who are people coming for help? And how can we continue to say, like our community engagement guy will go have coffee, or in the before times would go have coffee with the neighborhood association leader, or with the folks at Beyond the Boundaries, with the folk, the No Boundaries Coalition and Beyond the Boundaries. But anyway, all the boundaries have, connect with other nonprofits and other specifically kind of community organizing groups that are even on the more grassroots level than some of the nonprofits are. I don't know if that helps, but.
Got 3 minutes. Come on.
3 minute warning.
I have a really, I'm not really informed about this, but I'd like to just kind of know, like, I used to be part of, and I'm not anymore, but are you part of Beyond the Boundaries? Where is Beyond the Boundaries now? And the thing that I recall that it was really difficult to get just to fund, like, for lack of a better word, a director of, from the diocese. And Ray was talking about initiatives. I think maybe I might have been reading you wrong, but initiatives that like the diocese, the archdiocese can do maybe to help coordinate a lot of things like the Urban Commission or something of that nature. But it just doesn't seem to have any drive now. There just doesn't seem to, to be a big impetus within like the archdiocese higher, I don't want to call it the hierarchy, but the main ball game, like to like really put a lot of emphasis and the big thing, money, behind like coordinating a lot of stuff, because there's tons of like great stuff going on, whether it's through CCHD or Marian House or whatever the case might be. I mean, that like tons of stuff going on, Franciscan Center, but like, I don't know, like maybe I know like suburban parishes are involved, but even getting them, more equitably involved, like in funding some of this stuff, or having, I don't know. Does any of that make sense?
Was that for me? Because I'm always trying to convince the church that they need to invest in it. And I've went as far as asking for reparations in a formal document. So I get it. And that's what it's going to take. I feel as a church, we shouldn't be feeding the hungry without working to end hunger. Does that make sense? So
yeah, that's systemic stuff. Yeah.
Right. It should go beyond the charity that we do. And if we're going to have a nationwide divest, invest movement, then we should expect the church to invest in equity. And I would hope that would be the case, but as all businesses, there's a whole capital gains process and how this is going to leverage with that and so on and so forth, where sadly, implementing faith costs money. How about that?
Exactly. Did you see where Bishop Sutton with the Episcopal Church, the Church of the Incarnation, if on Charles Street, they were putting money towards what you were just talking about, reparations.
Yeah, they're doing the same
that's
thing.
That's a pretty bold move.
But I think it's necessary, and we outlined.
I mean, it's a not. Let me put it this way: it's a bold move, but it's really not a bold move. I mean, it's like what should happen.
Mhm.
Well, the bold move is the fact that we, not just our group, but different groups are saying that reparations essentially are the penance for the past practices of the church. So it doesn't necessarily mean give every slave that the church owned 40 acres and a mule, but more invest now in undoing your past practices. So if you were a kid and you got caught stealing a bag of chips and then you had to go to confession, your penance was you had to pay that debt, or you had to institute something to make sure that that person isn't in that situation again. So now those reparations should come in investing in the people that once were oppressed. And however that looks in the programming model is great. But like you said, it's going to take investment from the church.
Barry, I will look for the Beyond the Boundaries website in particular. I did notice in their last e-newsletter I got from them that their address is listed at 3615 Hartford Road. So I don't know how they're
That's
connected.
St. Fran, that's Bill Burke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, well, it's got Jerry.
House, so to speak. Yeah.
So I've kind of lost track of who their leadership is right now, but I know they're
I'd
working.
like to ask, in terms of just to go back, we were talking earlier about the law enforcement, repealing the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. So if you wanted to, do some letter writing or something like that, where should that go?
Well, you could write any of your state legislators. It's actually State Senate Bill 627. It's in the House right now, actually, and they are considering it with amendments. We are advocating for it to be adopted without amendments. And if anyone, let me put my email in the chat. And if you want to email me, I can actually send you a template letter that the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs has a template, as well as the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability also has a template. So, I mean, it's definitely a letter writing campaign happening right now because of inaccessibility in Annapolis. This has been the worst session in my career, and everyone knows I hate going to Annapolis, and I didn't think it could be worse, and it got worse on a year that I'm actually not going there, and it's still terrible. But if anybody wants to send me an email, I'll send you the templates on the bills. I have a update that I drafted. I kind of read over them, but it's more in depth if you want to kind of get involved and know the process. But I think
Hey, is it 410 or 419 in your email?
410.
Yeah, 410.
And also, if you're looking for templates, I know that Jews United for Justice has a template, and Baltimore Surge has a template out there on their website as well.
Yep. Both of those groups are also part of our statewide coalition, Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs. So there's going to be quite a few of the same template with a couple of words tweaked. We even have it in Spanish for CASA if they want to submit feedback on this as well. But people don't know that Baltimore City's police department is a state agency. So in order to make changes to these police departments, we have to count on people that don't live in Baltimore City to reach out to their legislators, because the whole state legislature has to vote on anything that changes BPD right now.
I know that the National Lawyers Guild has sent letters of support.
And we've been kind of blasting it now for about a month. So I think we're in a real favorable position for the first time. I'm sad about the proposed amendments to Senate Bill 627, which would essentially kill my recommendations as chair of the Civilian Oversight Task Force to create a civilian office of police accountability. But I think also with city control, we can still adjust that charter and have civilian oversight.
Before we leave, can you make a comment also about the bill that would take away the power from the governor to, to approve without the authority of the probation committee? I think, is it probation committee that gives the pardons?
Oh, the new expungement law.
Yeah.
So there wasn't, and I'm not sure if we're talking about the same bill. I can't drop the number, but so there used to be, there still is now until session is over, this thing called a unit rule. And it made it so if you were convicted of a felony, you couldn't expunge any other felony that you were arrested on at that same time. So the concept in Maryland is you get arrested, they charge you with a million things, and you get the plea bargain, and you get convicted of whatever you agreed to in the plea. But even those misdemeanor charges and things of that nature can never be expunged off of your record. So the repeal of that unit, and he vetoed it the first time. So it's been passed before just because it's what Brian said. It's that racist criminal justice system that allows them to keep tabs on people and keep you in the system and hold you back and prevent you from getting good jobs. So it actually passed in 2019 and he vetoed it, but they voted to repeal the veto this year. So that'll be a huge advancement for a lot of people that kind of survived and made it through that zero tolerance era in Baltimore, but still have that terrible criminal record. Now they at least can only deal with what they've been convicted of. I felt like that law was focused on Black people, Black men in Baltimore is why he vetoed that law, because then there would be a lot of us, and I say us because I am going to benefit from that rule, that now have to be addressed at face value. So
is there anything more we need to do, or he can't overrule the?
no, he can't overrule this overrule. He can't overrule the override. So that's going to have to be signed into law this time.
Okay, good. Great.
Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you, everybody, for coming for this good discussion. Like I said, we're recording everything today, so there will be an opportunity to see things that you might have missed. You're invited now to make your own lunch this year, but also join the Social Ministry Fair. There's a link on the website, and hopefully you have it if you'd like to join the fair between now and 12:45. So the next workshop starts at 12:45.
All right. I'm a little upset about my cookie this year.
I know.
Thank you, Ray. Great job, as usual.
Great to see you guys.
Ray,
And
thank you
like I
very
said,
much.
if you want to reach out, feel free. My email is there. And this fight continues. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much.